What is up, guys? Welcome back to another podcast. Today, I wanted to talk about some of the doubt that I faced when I first had the idea pop into my mind that I wanted to pursue, because I hadn't done it yet, pursue a tech career, kind of out of thin air from nothing, with no experience, no background, never took a computer class in my life. And then fast forward also some of the imposter syndrome that I felt once I had accomplished that. So to start off, the doubt that I experienced when I was first trying to learn, it's funny because in the moment I feel like I couldn't understand what was happening. I just kind of experienced it and luckily was able to get through it. But it's been really interesting to me since, because I've been in the tech field now for 3 years. So I'm pretty far removed from that time frame, and I feel like I can reflect back and think very clearly on what was going on in my mind and what was causing those emotions to happen. Because in the time in 2017 when I thought about learning, I created a plan, like a detailed plan, and I was like trying to hype myself up, like, yeah, you're gonna do this is gonna be so great, all these things, and then I would just like do nothing. I would just sit on it, and it really started to eat at me because I was like, what's holding me back? There's literally like nothing wrong. Like, there's no one coming to my house and like tying my hands behind me and like screaming at me or anything. Like, I'm not doing this for some reason, like in my own head, but I don't really understand why. And after a while, I realized it was the fear of failure. That was definitely a big catalyst for me. Like, I hadn't really done a lot with my life. I was, 24 at that point? I was like 2 years out of college, but I was pretty happy with how my life had gone professionally up until that point. And I feel like because like everyone around me knew that, like, not that I was crazy wildly successful, but the things that I had set my mind towards had gone well, and I had gotten jobs and was building my resume, building my experience, and I was really fearful of failing at something, like publicly and openly. And that was definitely a lot of the doubt that was, like, I think keeping myself from starting. And I remember after a while, I just thought, after realizing this took probably a couple of weeks for me to even like unravel in my own brain that I was thinking that this thought was why I was so anxious and why it was paralyzing my ability to do anything. And then after that, I thought about it for a couple more weeks. And then I think what really helped me get past that was thinking that, like changing the narrative in my mind, like, you have to do this and you have to succeed. There's no room for failure. There's no room for error. And I changed that to, you're young. You still have a lot of time in your life. There's really no downside. I don't have like a lot of responsibility that older people have. I don't have a mortgage. I'm not married. I don't have kids. There's really not a lot to worry about. And if I ever did it and it didn't work out, I could come back and take the job that I'm doing right now. There'd be no problem. And even beyond that, I reframed it from, you have to learn this skill to get a job which will be your career forever, to, let me just try to learn something new and see if I like it. And I think those two things were really big. That was what allowed me to become unparalyzed, was when I reframed that narrative and was able to take a lot of pressure off myself, and give myself the permission. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's the best word I can think of, like the permission that in the future, if I fail at this, I didn't even want to think about it as failing, just that there was like a picture perfect image of how I felt like it could go. And a lot of it was getting myself to be okay with that not working out. And like, hey, like, worst case scenario, I do this, I spend 6 months, a year, like learning this, studying it, and nothing comes of it, or I like almost get there but it doesn't work out and all my friends and family find out. That was like the worst case scenario. I was so afraid of looking like a failure, which I feel like is pretty common instinctual feeling. But once I was able to reframe it like, hey, this isn't about failure and success. This is about taking advantage of a time in my life and reframing it from like win-lose to just try to learn something and enjoy learning it and see if you like it. Because like I hadn't even done anything yet. I was just like thinking about doing it. So honestly, I might not have ended up liking it. So I was like, you should try to do this before you, like, why are you thinking so seriously about something you haven't even tried to do? It's so ridiculous now when I think about it years later, but those feelings were very, very strong in my brain. I'm very good at putting pressure on myself. That's something I'm very good at, which I feel like it helps me, but like in these scenarios, obviously it does not help me. So yeah, fast forward, fortunately everything worked out. And, looking back and being a little bit older now, it's crazy how like age and experience, I feel like, puts things in perspective. Like a lot of things that I feel like adults told me growing up, like not to worry and like not to put so much pressure on myself. I find myself telling myself that now, like looking back, if I could go back in time, I'd been like, dude, like it's okay. Like the pressure you have about this one thing having to work, like it's going to be okay. There are multiple career paths you can take. There's not like one cookie cutter version of success that you have to achieve, or else like the world's going to end. You're 24, like it's okay, chill. But yeah, in the moment it was pretty crazy. And then got through that, studied, talked about that in a different video. And then I remember very vividly, it was maybe my first week. I don't remember if it was my first day, but it was definitely my first week. I got my office. I got like these two nice, really big monitors, got a nice computer, and they were like, okay, so here's all this work. Yeah, we have a weekly meeting. You get paid twice a week. Yeah, like if you have any problems, just talk to us. And then I was just thinking in my head, like, oh my God, because I literally went from like sitting in my room and studying this stuff to like, people are relying on you now. Like these systems will go down like if you don't do your job correctly. I remember thinking like this is a tremendous amount of pressure or like real world consequence that I have found myself in. I remember thinking like to the imposter syndrome, like I tricked all of these people into hiring me. What have I done? I don't know if I can do this. But I think one of the things that helped calm me down and get me to a point where I was confident was I was like, hey, listen, even though the stakes in the scenarios that you were learning in with the projects that I did on my own and the lessons that I did on my own in my room, it's not the same as like on the job real world, but the fact remains that you did retain that knowledge, you did acquire those skills. Like I could go back in my mind and think about all of the tangible outcomes in those projects that I created, and those were bullet points in my brain that I could like anchor on, like, hey, even though it might be nerve-wracking now, first tech job, no experience, no degree, being able to go back to those things in my mind as anchor points of like, hey, you can do this, you should believe in yourself, don't freak out too much. And then also another anchor point that I think was the fact that like even though in my mind I felt like they made a mistake or like I tricked someone, the fact was like I interviewed, like I wasn't just a random person that they gave a job to. Like there were multiple people and they picked me, so obviously like, you know, they're not just going to do that for no reason. They're at least confident in me that I can do the job. I just now have to be confident in myself. So yeah, it's crazy thinking back now to like 3 years ago, but it's so vivid in my mind. I remember thinking that and feeling it very strongly. So those are two very interesting inflection points in my adult life. I hope you guys find that entertaining and maybe useful, because I think that's helped me a lot with a lot of the other things that I've tried to get into, whether it's photography or modeling. Now even with like YouTube and podcasting, I'm hoping to apply a lot of those same lessons. And I feel like a lot of the things, like I've gone through that same spectrum quicker. Like I feel like learning how to code helped me learn how to do photography quicker. I feel like with modeling, that's the other time in my life where I felt a tremendous amount of imposter syndrome. I felt more imposter syndrome when I first started modeling than I did at my first tech job. I think partly because it's a little bit less formalized, a lot of modeling that goes on, especially with like social media and everything. I didn't go in and like be cast for these things. People just reached out to me on Instagram, and I mean, it was awesome. I'm super grateful. They were like, hey, I really like your work. I like the aesthetic you have. We want it's funny because I started out as a photographer, and then later in time I wanted to get more comfortable in front of the camera. I actually had no intention of modeling. I just wanted better photos of myself to promote my photography, but I still approached it with the same quality intent. I wanted to make the pictures as best as I could. And yeah, after a while, people started reaching out to me for modeling gigs. It was so crazy because I remember the first time it happened, I was like, do they want me as a photographer or as a model? I can't tell. And then I was like, hey, are you looking for a photographer or a model? And they're like, we're looking for models. And in my mind, like, I was just like blown away. I was like, can't believe this is happening. It's so cool. But then same thing happened. One of the first photo shoots I did as a model, I just remember showing up and like, I was just like, I was literally shaking. You can't tell in the photos because you can go back now and look, but I was visibly, or at least in my mind, I was shaking throughout the entire photo shoot because you might not be able to tell so much if you don't do it, but if you do model or you're a photographer who have been around a lot of models, you can very quickly tell when someone is like a very talented model, like the way that they're comfortable with their body, the way they can position themselves, their confidence, their aura. It's very apparent very quickly. And I remember coming on to the photo shoot location and just watching people like kind of warm up, for lack of a better word. And I was just like, oh my God, everyone's so good. They're so like attractive and talented. And again, I felt like, wow, like someone made a mistake. Why am I here? What am I doing here? I felt that even stronger modeling. And then I remember I talked to some of them and they were like, yeah, I did like acting school, modeling school. And I just like, it's made it worse. I was like, oh my God, like, why am I here? These people have like gone through formal training. But I mean, it was really awesome. And I think for me, what helped in that scenario, find my confidence, a lot of it just came back to the fact, like, I had done a lot of photo shoots on my own with friends, and I was very confident in the poses that I could do and bring, and the energy and the aesthetic that I felt like I could bring. A lot of it, I think, that made me feel like the imposter syndrome was just the fact that, like, if you put my photos and my poses and my aesthetic next to these models that I was working with, there was like a clear, large talent gap, which added to the imposter syndrome. But yeah, I think that's definitely what happened or helped me find the confidence, was thinking back through the work that I had done up until then. And I had, and I still do, I try to practice every now and then my posing. I'll look at other models, editorials, and then try to practice and emulate what they're doing and try to find what looks best for my body in front of a camera. So I also went back to that, like, hey, you didn't just like show up here randomly, like, you created a body of work, people reviewed it, they liked it, all these things. So I went back to that as well. And it was a great time. I had a really great time, but it's crazy again, thinking back, that was like half a year ago now, maybe. But yeah, that first one, I was very nervous. But those are all the stories and points I had to make. So I hope you guys found this video interesting. It was a lot of fun to record and recount those stories and times in my life. If you have any questions, comments, definitely comment or reach out to me on Instagram. If not, YouTube. I'll have my handle in the description. And until then, see you guys in the next one.